Hello and welcome to the World of Stuff with me, your host Sai. This podcast focuses on all the exciting stuff that goes on around the world and how it works. And each week we'll go through a different topic. Today we're going to be talking about the Yuba County 5, so let's just jump right into it. On February the 24th, 1978, a group of 5 young friends left the Yuba City area of California on a 50-mile journey to attend a basketball game at California State University, Chico. After the game they stopped off at a local store for some snacks for the journey home. The store assistant felt slightly put out as she was trying to close up at the time, but served them nevertheless. It was to be the last time anyone could confidently confirm seeing them alive. 4 of the 5 were found dead in mysterious conditions. The 5th has never been seen again. Dubbed the American Dyatlov Pass incident, where 9 Russian hikers mysteriously died one night in the mountains. Yuba City was home to the Gateway Project, a vocational rehabilitation group that aimed to help and support people with disabilities. Among those who attended the Gateway Project were 5 young men who were each diagnosed with mild development disabilities. They were close friends and played on the basketball projects team, the Gateway Gators, together. From Yuba City itself, William Lee Sterling, known as Bill to his friends, was 29 years of age, deeply religious, and was diagnosed with mild development disabilities. Jack Antoine Madruga was 30 years of age and close friends with Bill. He lived in the nearby town of Marysville, just 2.5 miles from Yuba City. Jack was a high school graduate and had served in the US Army. After, he had been working on a factory line before being fired. Whilst he had no official diagnosis, his family believed him to have mild learning disabilities. He drove a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego, which was his pride and joy. Jack Charles Hewitt also lived in Marysville. He was the youngest of the group at 24 years of age and had been diagnosed with mild learning disabilities. He was best friends with Theodore. The pair were often described as being as close as brothers. Theodore Earl Vire, Ted to his friends, was 32 years of age and had attended Marysville High School. He had a friendly demeanour and had an upbeat personality. He had learning disabilities and worked at a snack bar, but his family had urged him to quit due to the perceived stress he suffered due to his disabilities. He lived 5 miles from Yuba City, in Olivehurst. Gary Dale Mathias was 25 years of age and was from Yuba City. He was placed in a psychiatric ward in high school following a bad hallucinogenic trip. He wore incredibly thick glasses due to his poor eyesight. His family mentioned that without them, he would almost certainly be seeing double. He was in the US Army, where he constantly used drugs, was awarded a sharpshooting medal, had an AWOL arrest, and was medically discharged for paranoid schizophrenia in 1973. He struggled with his illness, which often led to violent outbursts. However, after treatment, he had been able to control these and also learnt to cope with his illness. He was taking medication daily and had been controlling his schizophrenia, along with the outbursts, for the past 2 years. He'd begun working part-time as a labourer for his father-in-law's small landscape gardening business. Even though all 5 had health difficulties and forms of development disabilities, and living at home with their parents, they were high-functioning. They all appeared to be managing well. Both Jack and Gary had driving licenses and have a level of independence away from the care of their families. Their favourite activity was sports in all forms, and their family said that when they got together, it was either to play a game or to watch one. The main sport they played was basketball, as they were on the Gateway Projects team, the Gateway Gators. On the 24th of February 1978, the 5 men got into Jack's Mercury Montego and were ready to head to California State University, 50 miles away to see a basketball game. As he left the house, Ted shrugged off his grandmother's protest to take a coat with him. "Oh, Grandma, I don't need a coat," he said. "Not tonight," as he joined the other 4 men in the car. At 8 a.m. the following morning, the 25th of February, Imogen Vire, Ted's mother, woke to find his room still empty. Concerned, she called Joanna Sterling, Bill's mother, who'd been up all night waiting for her son to return, which she confirmed he was still yet to do. The pair phoned around the rest of the group's family and confirmed with the others that none of the men had returned home. They had even missed their own basketball game with the Gateway Gators, which they had all been looking forward to for a long time. The 5 men were set to play in a week-long Special Olympics tournament the following morning. The families would later report all 5 men were extremely excited about the tournament because the winners would be awarded a week-long trip to Los Angeles. Some of the 5 had even laid out their uniforms. Gary had been reminding his mother about it all week. "We've got a big game Saturday. Don't you let me oversleep," he had reminded her daily. Understandably, the families were now quite concerned, and at 8 p.m. that night, Jack's mother called the police to report the men missing. The police in both Yuba City and Chico, who referred to the five as boys, began to search the route between the two cities, but found no sign of the five men. After several days of searching with no luck, the police in Chico received a call from a Plumas National Forest Ranger who told them that he had seen a car matching the description that the five men were driving, a 1969 Mercury Montego, on the side of the road in a forest a few days earlier. The car had been abandoned 70 miles away from Chico and nowhere near Yuba City, and located on a snowy, bumpy mountain road that wound up through the Sierra County mountain range that none of the men had been known to even frequent. The car was parked by the roadside and abandoned on the snowline, unlocked and with one of the windows wound down. Around the car sat 11 inches of snow, but by the roadside the snow had drifted and sat between 4 and 6 feet deep. There was no trace of the five men, but there were wrappers left from the snacks they had earlier bought in the local store a few days earlier, along with a half-eaten chocolate bar which was left on the back seat. There were also 4 maps in the glove compartment, one of which was a California. While the car had been found in the snowdrift, the snow was shallow enough that the 5 young men should have been able to push it out, yet there was no sign this was attempted. The car keys were gone, though the police hotwired the car to see if it had any engine trouble, but it started first time without any issues, and it still had a quarter tank of fuel remaining. Although there was some evidence that the wheels had spun in the snow sometime previously, it easily drove out of the low snowdrift. After further inspection of the car, the police noted there was no damage, dents, or mud scrapes on the undercarriage of the car, despite being driven up nearly 50 miles of poorly maintained mountain roads in the middle of winter. The police theorised that whoever drove the vehicle had to have known the roads extremely well and driven extremely carefully along the bumpy road at night without scraping it, before seemingly abandoning the vehicle and disappearing into the night, poorly dressed for the cold mountain conditions. The police could not figure out why the men had abandoned the car, or why the car was so far away from their destination, Yuba City. The police made initial attempts at early searches, but the poor weather conditions hampered their efforts, and at one point becoming dangerous for the search and rescue teams themselves. Due to the increasingly bad weather conditions and several delays, the search teams were called off. During this time, the police and families had put out public requests for any information, including photographs of the missing men, and 1 week later, leads and witnesses began to turn up. There were 2 credible reports of sightings of the 5 young men that were given to the police. The first was of Joseph Shons, a 55-year-old man who had been visiting his cabin on the 24th of February on the mountainside. He had driven up there as he had intended to take his family to stay in the cabin the following weekend, and had wanted to check the snow line in advance. On his way back down the mountain road, at around 5:40 p.m, his car became stuck in a deep rut in the road, around 150 feet or 46 meters up the road. In his attempt at freeing his Volkswagen Beetle, he realized he was beginning to experience the early symptoms of a mild heart attack. Thinking his best bet for survival and getting any form of help would be to get back in his car, he climbed into the seat, laying down, but left the engine and heating running. 6 hours later, around 11:30 p.m, lying in the car and experiencing excruciating pain, he told the police how he saw headlights on the road below his car. Looking out behind his car, he saw a parked car behind him, headlights on, with a group of people around it. One of those appeared to be a woman holding a baby. He shouted for help, but they stopped talking and turned their headlights out. A few hours later on, around 1:30 a.m, Shons continues to say he saw more lights from behind him, this time flashlights, along with a whistling sound that also went out, and the people vanished when he called to them. After that, he saw a pickup truck parking 20 feet behind his car once again, and then continuing on down the road. One account given to the Los Angeles Times, he told of how he saw 2 sets of headlights 20 feet behind his car, one from a car and one from a pickup truck. He attempted to shout for help, but the headlights immediately went out and a group of people standing at the 2 cars left back down the road together in the pickup truck. Shons clarified to the police that he could not be totally sure of what happened, as he was almost delirious due to the pain he was in. Either way, both accounts are the same, with the lights going out after his shouts for help. Once his car had run out of fuel in the early morning hours, the pain he was experiencing had subsided enough for him to walk the 8 miles down the road to a local lodge. As he left his car around 20 yards down the road, he walked straight past the 1969 turquoise and white Mercury Montego. In the spot where he recalled hearing voices originate along with the whistling, doctors had confirmed that he had suffered a mild heart attack. The other notable witness report, also around a week later, was from a store clerk at Mary's County store in Brownsville, 30 miles southeast of where the car had been abandoned. This could have been reached if the men continued down the road from where they left the car. She reported seeing 5 men matching the photographs released by the police at around 2 p.m. on Saturday the 25th of February. Madruga and Sterling, she claimed, recognising their faces from the photographs, were using a phone in the store whilst the others sat in a red pickup truck in the parking lot outside. The story was corroborated by the store owner, and the police found her to be a credible witness and took her account seriously. However, the families of the men doubted the veracity, stating their behaviour, specifically that of Jack using the phone, would have been completely out of character as they knew it. Jack's brother often had to take responsibility for Jack's calls in the past. Such was his adversity to using a phone himself. The store owner also told investigators that men, whom he believed to be Vire and Hewitt, came in and bought burritos, chocolate milk, and soft drinks. Vire's brother said the owner's description of the two men's behaviour seemed consistent, as Vire would eat anything he could get his hands on, and being best friends he was often accompanied by Hewitt more than anyone else. All through the spring, Yuba County Lieutenant Lance Ayers had been searching for the lost men, and it had almost consumed him. He had gone to Marysville High School with Vire and his brothers, although he had not known them well. There was something about the silent disappearance of the 5 men that haunted him like nothing he had ever investigated. The police had leads coming in from all over the country, but they led to nothing. Becoming increasingly desperate, although skeptical, and despite protests from some of the family members, the police consulted psychic mediums to assist in the search for the men. One told him the boys had been kidnapped to Arizona and Nevada that led nowhere. Another said the boys had been murdered in Oroville in a 2-story red house, brick or stained wood, with a gravel driveway and the number 4723 or 4753. For 2 solid days, Ayers drove every street in Oroville looking for that house that ultimately never even existed. It was discovered that Gary had known some people in Forbstown, just east of Yuba City, and the police initially suspected that it could have been feasible that the men had decided to visit Gary's friend and gotten lost, turning up the mountain pass and becoming panicked. The families, however, questioned this theory, believing the boys would not have done so with a big basketball game for the Gateway Gators the following day. Furthermore, the families of Sterling and Vire expressed how they both hated the outdoors and had always stayed at home on previous camping trips and outdoor hikes. Upon further investigation by the police, it became apparent that Gary's friend in Forbstown stated that he hadn't seen Gary in over a year. Yuba County Undersheriff Jack Beecham said of the disappearance, "This case is bizarre as hell. As time goes on, foul play becomes a greater probability. It's hard to lose 5 people, that's for sure." As winter turned into spring, most of the higher elevated snow had melted, and the search began anew. On June 4th, a small group of motorcyclists out for a general Sunday ride pulled up to an abandoned Forest Service trailer. As they entered the trailer, they were greeted by a grotesque smell, along with a broken window, and inside, laying on a bed and wrapped up in 8 layers of blankets, was the body of Ted Vire. He was stretched out on the bed inside the main 60-foot trailer, frozen to death. The sheets had been pulled over his body and tucked around his head. He wore no shoes, nor were his shoes anywhere in the trailer, and his feet had been badly frostbitten. The way he had been wrapped up in the sheets, along with the state of his feet and how painful it would have been, it is believed that one of the others had been there to pull them over his body. It is thought that possibly Hewitt had been there with him, along with Matthias, as his tennis shoes were inside the Forest Service trailer, which suggested to investigators that he might have taken them off to put on Vire's leather shoes, particularly since Vire had bigger feet, and Matthias's feet might have swollen with frostbite. However, this is just speculation, as the police had no evidence to go by. On the bedside table sat his ring with the name Ted engraved on it, his gold necklace, and wallet still with money inside, along with a gold watch with its crystal missing, which the families identified to have never belonged to any of the 5 men. There were a dozen empty cans of sea rations on the floor, some that had been opened with an army-issue tin opener, which Matthias would have learnt how to open while in the army. Vire had been a tall, heavy-set guy back in February, 5 feet 11, 200 pounds or 90 kilograms, but by the time his body had been found, he had lost between 80 to 100 pounds or 36 to 45 kilograms. Police estimated from his weight loss and a growth of his hair and beard that he had survived for up to 13 weeks in the cabin, slowly starving and freezing to death. What made this situation even more bizarre was the fact the trailer had plenty of matches, along with plenty of flammable books, paper, and furniture to burn, and yet no attempt to start a fire had been made. What was even more bizarre was the fact the full propane tank was in another shed ready to use. It would have heated the entire trailer. yet it had not even been switched on. All they had to do was turn on that gas, said Yuba County Lieutenant Lance Ayers, and he would have had gas to the trailer and heat. The rations too posed questions. They were taken from a storage shed on the park grounds. However, in the same shed was an unlocked cabinet full of food with enough supplies to have fed all 5 for over a year, but it was left completely untouched. These rations were canned, pre-cooked and prepared meals issued to the US military, along with a huge supply of freeze-dried meals. Why did Ted both freeze to death while being capable of making a fire, and starve to death while having plenty of food to eat? Furthermore, the trailer park was 19.4 miles uphill from the abandoned car, which meant that Ted had to have walked almost 20 miles in the snowdrifts of up to 6 feet just to reach the trailer. The next day after finding Ted's body, they continued the search along the road between the trailer and the abandoned Montego, and found the remains of who would later be identified as Madruga and Sterling on opposite sides of the road, 11.4 miles from where the car had been. Madruga's body had been partially consumed by scavenging animals and dragged about 10 feet to a stream, where he laid face up, his right hand curled around his watch. Only the bones remained of Sterling, which had been scattered over a small area. Autopsy showed they had both died of hypothermia. Deputies speculated that one may have succumbed to the desire for sleep and the other refused to leave his side, eventually meeting the same fate. 2 days later, as part of another search party, Jack Hewitt's father found his son's backbone 2 miles northeast of the trailer. Ayers had tried to talk him out of joining the search, fearing something like this might happen, but he insisted on going. There were a few other bones along with Jack's shoes and jeans that were nearby that helped identify the body. The next day, a Plumas County deputy sheriff found a skull 300 feet downhill from the body, later confirmed through dental records to have been Hewitt's. His death was also attributed to hypothermia. In an area to the northwest of the trailer, roughly a quarter-mile away, one of the search teams found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight by the road. Although it could not be determined how long these items had been there was no trace of Gary Mathias. The death of the 4 young men and the disappearance of Gary Mathias have led to numerous questions that still to this day remain unanswered. One of the biggest questions that remain is how the men ended up 70 miles east of their last known location and 30 minutes from anywhere they had planned to be. Chico to Yuba City is a straight road down Highway 70, a 46-mile drive that takes around 1 hour, yet the car was found 5,000 feet up a mountain above the snowline in a completely different direction. What made them go in this direction? Did they take a wrong turn? Were they forced, or did they decide themselves to take a detour? One of the most obvious theories would be that they simply took a wrong turning and refused to turn back. The main criticism of this theory is turning from the main road onto the mountain road would simply not be a route likely to be taken accidentally. You would have to go out of your way to reach the mountain road. Furthermore, the men's families stated the boys would not have voluntarily gone onto the mountain road for their great dislike of the outdoors and tendency to stick rigidly to habits. None of the boys knew the road as far as anyone could tell. One time, about 8 years earlier, Bill Sterling had gone fishing with his father at a cabin not far away, but he had not enjoyed himself and had stayed home every time they went back. 3 years ago, Ted had hunted deer with his friends in Feather River County, but it was quite a way west of the area where they found the car, and his family says he was not keen on the forest either. With the exception of Mathias, who occasionally stayed out all night with friends, each of the lost men led mostly stay-at-home lives of such scheduled predictability that no one could fathom what or who might have taken them up that lonely road in the mountains. There was some force that made them go up there, Jack Magruga's mother Mabel says firmly. They wouldn't have fled off in the wood like a bunch of quail. We know good and well that someone made them do it. We can't visualize someone getting the upper hand on those 5 men, but we know it must have been. Ted Vire's sister-in-law said they seen something at the game, at the parking lot. They might have seen it and didn't even realize they'd seen it. Then there is the car, left unlocked and with a window open. The car was said to be Jack's pride and joy, and it's incredibly unusual for him to leave it voluntarily. The state of the car too raises questions, such as the undercarriage being entirely undamaged, despite it being a low-riding vehicle filled with 5 men. The police have speculated the reasoning for this is Madruga drove incredibly carefully, or he knew the road very well, or allowed someone else to drive. Contradicting this is Jack's brother, who insists that he would never have allowed anyone else to drive his car. However, this doesn't explain one of the biggest questions. If the car was running fine, not stuck, and not out of fuel, why was it abandoned in the first place? Furthermore, who or what, if anything, had Joseph Shon seen while he was in his car calling for help, including the men in the pickup, the woman with the baby, and the whistling noises? The car door was left open, so one theory is the boys were searching in the snow for the keys, had been terrified at Shon's call for help. This would explain the flashlight that Shon saw, the one that was found. The men's parents again insisted that if the men had heard someone calling for help, they were sure they would not have ignored him. Another remaining question is Ted Vire, who was found 19.4 miles away from the abandoned car. Why had the men hiked up a mountain to reach the trailer? They had no outdoor clothing, and there was up to 6 feet of snow. Even more confusing is the trailer itself, which had enough food and equipment to keep them warm, yet it had been left untouched, despite evidence at least some of the men had been in the shed. Why not use the propane tank turning on the trailer's heating system? Why didn't Vire eat? Was someone preventing him from eating? Madruga and Hewitt were found several miles away. Why did they not all stick together? Or did they die on the way to the trailer? Or did they leave the trailer in search of help after Vire's death? Furthermore, whose watch was it that was left by the side of the bed? Finally, what happened to Gary Mathias? Only his shoes were ever found, and no other evidence existed that showed he'd been with the group at any other time. To this day, no evidence has shown up to explain his disappearance. There is a lot of speculation regarding Mathias and his role in the deaths of the 4 others, but there simply isn't any evidence one way or another. There is a lot of information on the topic of Mathias that I will not get into. However, many believe that Mathias has a big role to play in the deaths of the 4 other men. Ted's brother Dallas once said, "No one pulled the trigger on the boys, but something or someone killed them." When asked if he thought Mathias was the one who set his brothers and the others up to die, Dallas Vire replied, "That's the only thing that makes sense." Jack Beecham, the Yuba County undersheriff who investigated the case, said, "They were either forced or manipulated. And where does Mathias come into that? Maybe he had nothing to do with it, we'll never know, but I think he did." Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of The World of Stuff. If you did, feel free to check out some of my other episodes. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you, and take care.